The moment a man stops tolerating disrespect is the moment that his life changes forever. The reality is, a man can only truly say that he is a strong man and a principled man when he has absolute certainty that he has a zero tolerance policy for disrespect in his life. Regardless of who it is. It can be a close friend, it can be a family member, it can be a colleague, a co-worker, or even a boss. It doesn't matter who is being disrespectful in the moment. He does not tolerate it. He does not allow it because he understands the importance of respecting himself and being a principled man who does not allow people to walk all over him. Right now, there are a lot of guys who are struggling to stand up for themselves. Maybe they're finding themselves in a situation where they are constantly being disrespected. Sometimes this can appear light, this can appear like a joke, particularly within friend groups, just a little bit of banter. But often this is not the case, and often a lot of guys are living quiet lives of desperation, and they feel like they can't escape. They're always being mocked, they're always being laughed at. Their misfortune is always being shared, and shared in a way where people are happy to see them do badly. And they just feel trapped within their group of friends, maybe even close family members. They feel like they can't really trust, they can't really rely on. They feel like they're not really there for them. And sometimes even at the workplace, it is more important to be able to look yourself in the eye, knowing that you are a man who does not tolerate disrespect, knowing you are a man that respects himself, than to have people in your life that don't show you the respect that you want. I don't care if it's your family. I don't care if it's a friend that you've been friends with for a really long time. Your peace is not something that we negotiate. Your self-esteem is not something that we negotiate. It means everything. And sometimes, in order to preserve that peace, in order to preserve the image that you have of yourself, you need to start enforcing some serious boundaries. And you need to start kicking some people out of your life. There's an expression that not everyone that you lose is a loss. And this is absolutely true. You may be very nervous about enforcing that boundary and getting rid of that friend, or creating some serious distance from that friend. Maybe you don't have a lot of friends. Maybe you feel like you're not going to get another friend like this. This is a friend maybe that you've spent a long time with, or maybe it's even a family member who you have been very close with. And I would say we are often surprised at the weight that is lifted off our shoulders when we take that first bit of distance, when we enforce that boundary, when we refuse to tolerate disrespect. Often all it takes is simply standing up for yourself one time in a firm manner, in a respectful manner, but a firm manner. Often what happens when you do this is that the person who has been disrespecting you is extremely surprised, because for the longest time they have been able to speak to you disrespectfully, like a little boy sometimes, like a child, without any repercussion, without any consequence. So when you object for the first time and you say to them, don't speak to me like that. You're not going to speak to me like that anymore. If you continue speaking to me like that, we're going to have to evaluate this friendship. If you continue speaking to me like that, I don't think I'm going to spend much more time with you. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be something from a film. But when you say this to somebody and you make that first objection, 9 times out of 10, they really are shocked and they don't know what to say, what to think. Because for the first time, you have stood up for yourself. And in their head, that's a confusing reality. But this is where you must be strong. So if somebody decides to laugh at your objection and they say, yeah, whatever, something along the lines of that, they don't believe you, they don't buy into what you're saying, they don't think you're serious, well, now is the time to show them how serious you are. Now, one thing I'm going to say is, you know, always avoid violence. You don't want to find yourself in these high conflict scenarios, you know, where fists are flying. Now, I'm not going to say that's not happened in my life, but look, you know, checking disrespect doesn't have to be this aggressive thing. You know, you don't have to assert physical dominance over somebody. You know, you don't have to assert dominance at all. You can simply assert self-respect, and a part of that self-respect is by being able to walk away. You know, I would always say if somebody's been disrespecting you and you're not happy with it, address it. Because maybe, we give the benefit of the doubt, maybe they're unaware of how they've been coming across. And look, family, friends, close friends, I do feel like we should be giving them a chance. But look, once you've given them that chance and, you know, if they don't take it and they don't apologize or they don't show signs of changing their ways, you must be able to walk away. And again, as I said, not everybody you lose is a loss. Sometimes you're going to walk away and you're going to feel a tremendous weight lifted off your shoulders. And, you know, you're going to understand that actually they weren't really a friend. Yes, you perceive them to be a friend. Yes, you spent time with them the same way that you spend time or a person spends time with their friends, but when you were with them, you didn't enjoy yourself. When you were with them, you didn't feel respected. When you were with them, you didn't laugh, you didn't smile. You didn't share happy moments, you didn't support one another. Or maybe you supported them, but you felt like they didn't support you. And again, that's not friendship. And you're going to learn these things. And what that's going to do is that's going to show you who the real friends you are, who the real friends that you have in your life are. Rather, it's going to show you who's not your friend and who is your friend. It's going to show you the behaviors that you like and the behaviors that you don't like. And you're going to learn a lot. But you never do this learning, you never do this discovery by staying in the same situation. Staying around the same people that make you feel shit. Enforce the boundary. Tell them you're not going to tolerate disrespect anymore. And if they continue, further enforce it and walk away. Stick to your word and be a man whose actions and words are aligned. It's going to be tough. You know, sometimes it's not easy, especially if you've never done this before. I mean, I remember a situation when I was younger. I was working in retail, one of my first proper jobs, and I had this manager. And he would speak to people in this really direct way, this really rude, instructional, direct way, whereby he would tell you, Alfie, go and get this now. Alfie, go and clean that up now. And I remember, you know, I hadn't been in the job too long, but I was not comfortable with how I was being spoken to. And I was not accustomed to being spoken to like that. Now look, I had older brothers. You know, I'm not saying that I didn't have some trouble in my earlier years. I absolutely did, and there were many fights. But, you know, there was a tone of respect within the household that I was living in, you know, within, you know, people that I would call my friends. There's a way to speak and there's a way not to speak, and this was alien to me. And I remember one day in particular, I was behind the checkouts, I was doing my thing, and he'd said something particularly snappy. And I thought, okay, this can't continue, because this guy believes that he can speak to me like a dog. This guy believes that he can speak to me in this disrespectful way. And I remember the shift finished and we'd closed up the store. It was in the evening, it was dark. And I remember walking to the car park and just about to say goodbye. It was myself and him. And before I, you know, got into the car, I said, can I have a moment? And I just said, look, what you said to me earlier, the way that you spoke to me earlier, you can't speak to me like that. I won't tolerate that. And if that happens again, we are going to have a big problem. And look, I was a young guy, but I was serious. And it was maybe a strange scenario for a, you know, relatively young man to stand up for himself in that way against, you know, a manager, somebody that has power over his position. A lot of people are very scared of this because the power dynamics are clear. But I just thought to myself in that moment, you know what? It doesn't matter who he is. It doesn't matter the authority or the position that he held. And I mean, look, we're not talking about a super important job here. We're talking about retail. And, you know, some managers within that line of work, they really take their job so seriously. And they can be, you know, almost like a terrorist to work under. They just rule the roost, and they have things their way and only their way. Very little flexibility, some of these people. Look, some of them are lovely, but some of them are like this. But I just thought to myself, you know what, I cannot be spoken to like that by anybody. Doesn't matter who. And anyway, I expressed what I expressed, and the look on this guy's face was a look of complete shock. You know, I could tell that he had never been spoken to like that. Nobody had ever rebutted anything that he'd said previously in that way. Especially somebody of my age at the time, 18, right? And he said to me, look, I'm really sorry. I've had a really bad day. I was stressed. I won't do it again. And he didn't. You know, I'm not saying the guy's character changed completely. I'm not saying he turned into Mr. Smiley, Mr. Happy, but we never really had a problem after that. We never really had a repeat. And look, I was at that time, you know, feeling a little bit nervous before doing that, because I understood the power difference. And I understood the imbalance in regards to his position and my position. But ultimately, those nerves didn't stop me doing what I knew needed to be done. Now, you might not find yourself in the same situation. It might be something completely different. Maybe it's a girl that you're with and, you know, she's making some comments to you that you're not happy about. Now, look, always keep your cool. Don't lower yourself to somebody else's level. You know, they're swearing and they're shouting and these things. I mean, you should never, ever tolerate that. And if you're finding yourself in a relationship like that with a woman who is comfortable shouting and swearing at you, I mean, if she's comfortable doing that to your face, I'm sure she's more comfortable doing other things behind your back. You know, that's a relationship you've got to leave. But look, you've got to enforce boundaries. Doesn't matter who it is. It can be a girlfriend. It can be a close family member. You know, it's a shame that some people have bad relationships with their close family members, but it's a reality. You know, just because somebody has the title of mum or dad, you know, doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to behave in a way that a mum and dad should, right? So sometimes you've got to enforce these boundaries with people that are very close to you. family members that are very close to you. Because the alternative is encouraging a behavior that makes you feel terrible. The alternative is establishing a culture of disrespect, showing to people that you are not somebody who respects himself, showing people that you are weak. And you're not. But you're doing yourself a disservice by not standing up for yourself. You know, I've worked with guys on a one-to-one level who have told me that this is one of their biggest issues. You know, standing up for themselves, not tolerating disrespect. They're so scared to take action. And I would say, look, the alternative of living a life where you are constantly being disrespected and constantly feeling like a weak man is worse than the short-term pain of standing up for yourself. You can build it up. You can start to think this is going to be some big ordeal in your mind, and you can get so nervous about instilling a fairly basic and healthy boundary that you don't do it. But the reality is, it's not that scary, and it's all in your head. And 9 times out of 10, when you tell somebody, hey, listen, don't fucking speak to me like that, they don't do it again. Now look, probably don't express yourself the way I just did. Sorry, YouTube, please don't censor me. But that's the truth. You know, most times people are going to back down. And look, if you're struggling for confidence, get yourself to some kind of martial arts class. Get yourself into a boxing club. Start learning how to throw some punches. Start learning how to throw some kicks. Get yourself punched in the face by people that are way better than you. It makes you feel way more confident when you're walking around normal people who don't know how to fight. You know, not to be arrogant, but you guys that have trained martial arts, you will completely resonate with me. Maybe you guys that haven't, you won't. But being that I have trained martial arts for a long time, when I find myself in the extremely rare situations where I have been disrespected and somebody makes a sly comment, I feel supremely confident that if this situation ever gets out of hand, I can deal with it. You know, I'll always check people. I'll always say, look, you know, don't speak to me like that. Oh no, you don't know me like that. Calm down, settle down. Always try and make it light and humorous if it's somebody that you don't really know. But, you know, sometimes people will think they can step up to that level. And I tell you, you know, a way to really gain some confidence is to put yourself in an environment where you are training martial arts, where you're getting punched, where you're, you know, throwing combinations, you're really pushing yourself and learning from people that are way better than you. Anxiety goes away, you know. If anything, you get pumped up for those situations. But look, back to the main point. We're avoiding violence at all costs. Confrontation doesn't have to be a physical thing. You must not be scared of confrontation, you know. You've got to be willing to stand up for yourself. But, you know, we always try and de-escalate. And look, some people you can't negotiate with. Some people are just the way that they are. And again, that's where you need to be prepared to walk away. That's where you need to be prepared to align your actions with your words and walk away and get them out of your life. Not everyone that you lose is a loss, remember that. So look, to round things up, it is far more costly and painful and expensive to keep people in your life that are disrespecting you, or to not check disrespect, than it is for the short-term pain of checking disrespect and telling people that you will not be treated that way and standing up for yourself. Don't overthink it, you know. It's not as scary as you think it is. And most people, I believe, are good. Most people maybe haven't realized how they've been making you feel. And most people will turn around and apologize and probably be quite shocked that you stood up for yourself. But you've got to stand up for yourself. It's everything. You've got to be able to look yourself in the mirror, look at yourself in the eye, and know that you are a man who respects himself. And that starts by enforcing these boundaries and never tolerating disrespect. Anyway, guys, if you took some value from this video today, be sure to smash the like button, subscribe to my channel if you are new around here, and comment your thoughts down below. As always, guys, thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll see you in the next one.